Hey, I want to discuss a phenomenon that I've noticed on media, particularly on television media, and it's that certain figures, and they tend to be men. It's just an observation. I'm not making any comment with that. It's just an observation. Tend to be kind of held up. They seem to be untouchable because of ratings. And I'm going to use three figures as an example of this. Jeremy Kyle, Jeremy Clarkson, Piers Morgan. Three pretty famous television personalities. And I want to sort of talk a little bit about each and why I think they represent this sort of phenomenon. Firstly, I think this comes amidst this backdrop of the era that we're in, which is often dismissed as politically correct, the snowflake generation and so on. I agree to some extent with that. I mean, when we hear of clapping being banned at Oxford University, when we hear of students being allowed to walk out of Shakespeare seminars in case they don't like the violence of Hamlet, you can easily see where the overly sensitive generation idea comes from. And I do dislike the shackling nature of political correctness. I think it is problematic. So I think guys at shock, presenters at shock, are kind of refreshing for viewers in a sense. I'm not saying refreshing for me, but I think that's where it comes from partially. So let me just go through these three. Jeremy Kyle. I have my own stance on the three, by the way. I have contempt for Jeremy Kyle. I don't have much respect for Jeremy Clarkson, and I mix views about Piers Morgan. So I'm not going to pretend I'm totally neutral on this. I've got my own opinions. But with Jeremy Kyle, his show got axed prominently earlier this year after a suicide, after running for 14 years. Now, I think Kyle is a slimy, cynical, nasty turd of a man. I've no time for him at all. Because, I mean, he would play judge, jury and execution on his show. He would exploit troubled and unlikable people. He would stoke up his audience. He had zero experience as a psychotherapist, as a counsellor, as a lawyer, as a police, as any sort of capacity whatsoever to do what he was doing. I think it was a disgusting show, and I'm pleased it was axed. But it does, it's interesting that he still has significant support. There's groups online that are trying their best to get the show back. Oh, Jeremy didn't do anything wrong. These idiots fail to recognise that, for example, his flawed lie detector tests were brought up in the parliamentary committee as just that, as being flawed. Now, Kyle is a coward. He wouldn't face the committee even to defend himself. Yet this is a man who relied on lie detector tests to try and vilify his guests. So it's utterly pathetic. But here's the catch with this. ITV done the right thing getting rid of the show, but they also made the caveat, we understand that Jeremy is popular with his fan base, and we can see a capacity for Jeremy coming back. So although the show's gone consigned to history, thank goodness, Kyle will be back in some other format, maybe the Jeremy Kyle files or whatever it may be. Now, this indicates to me that ITV see Kyle as valuable. So this is an example. Despite the enormous controversy that his show generated, he should, in my opinion, there'd be ground for even criminal proceedings for misleading guests, for fraud, among other things. But ITV is now finding some capacity to bring him back, not that show, but bring him back. So he's being rewarded, essentially. That indicates to me he has significant power on ITV. Then we come to Jeremy Clarkson. Now, I don't feel as strongly about Clarkson as I do about Kyle, but I think it's fair to say that Clarkson has become known for being a bit of a shock jock, or being a bit of a shock presenter. You know, he's one of these people that is kind of notorious for notorious sake, and so much of it is kind of dismissed as laddish banter, although this lad is now a man in his 60s, right? So I can give examples of this. I've just been watching Robot Wars. It was a great show. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was, you know, you had teams from around the country designing robots to basically fight with each other. Jeremy Clarkson presented the first few series, followed by I was going to say Charles Clark, not the former Home Secretary, the Scouser guy. His name will come to me in a minute. I'm Philippa Forrester. Craig Charles, that's him. Anyway, characteristic Clarkson, you know, every sort of competitor that comes on, Clarkson has to make some snidey comment, some patronising comment, and it's just, his fans find it amusing. I just find it a bit tedious. It's like predictable. Now, I'm not going to lie, I think Clarkson can be quite witty. And there is certainly a capacity. I mean, I remember when he done the Great Britain's thing, and he was pitching for Isambard Kingdom Brunel. I thought he'd done that very well. And on something like Top Gear, I totally accept that pitches to a certain demographic, and you know, his presenting style is obviously going to be different than someone presenting on the Chelsea Flower Show, obviously. But I think sometimes the banter has just crossed the line, where he's been shocking for shock's sake, and sometimes it's just striking. It strikes me as just callousness. So an example of this, when he spoke about, let me just get the quotation here. Yeah, in November 2008, Clarkson attracted over 500 complaints to the BBC when he joked about lorry drivers murdering prostitutes. This was just 2 years after the Suffolk Strangler case, where 5 young women were murdered. Eddie Stubbart, or Andrew Tinkler, chief executive of the Eddie Stubbart Group, they were just having a laugh. It's the 21st century, let's get our sense of humour in line. That's a prick's answer, to be quite honest. Because, like I said, not everyone has the same sense of humour, but that's not funny. It's just not funny. I mean, it's, you know, those young women had families. And this is something I really have a problem with when it's dismissed as banter. Callousness is not banter. It's not. And you're a prick if you think it is. I'll say that to anyone. I'll say it to their face. A lot of other things, politically incorrect, yada yada yada. Some of it I don't think is necessarily callous. I think it's a bit politically incorrect. But I mean, you know, there's times he really does cross a line, in my opinion. Just scrolling down here, there was another one that stuck out for me. Yeah. November 2011, while being interviewed for the BBC's The One Show, Clarkson commented on the UK's public sector strike that day, lauding the capital's empty roads. After mentioning the BBC's need for balance, he said, "I would take them outside and execute them in front of their families." The programme later apologised for his remarks, with further apologies issued by the Clarkson, which were fake apologies. Clarkson wasn't sorry, he was made to apologise. You know, let's be honest about that. Now, for those who say, oh, well, it was just banter, 21,335 complaints, 314 messages of support. So the overwhelming majority of people thought Clarkson crossed the line with that one. Execute them in front of their families. Do not tell me that's banter. You know, what pisses me off about fanboys of people like Clarkson is they dismiss everything as banter. This guy's a shock jock. I mean, I get the appeal, I really do. He's a man's man, he says what's on his mind, he likes to shock. I do get the appeal. So that's obviously more engaging than someone who's really dull. But it's just shock for shock's sake. And you cannot tell me that the sort of callous comments that I've just quoted is banter. It's not. So I see Clarkson as a bit of an egomaniac, and he is what he is. He's kind of a caricature of himself. Then we come to third person, Piers Morgan. Now Morgan, unlike the other two, I actually have some respect for, because, for example, when he worked in the United States, I do genuinely respect the way he stood up to the gun lobby, and he faced a lot of threats and personal abuse as a result of that. I respect anyone who stands up to the gun lobby in America. I also personally agree with a lot of his politics. For example, his critique of third wave feminism and transgender pronouns and all the nonsense that comes with that. But the problem with Piers Morgan is his rudeness, his arrogance. I mean, he invites people on this morning, he just talks over them. As I understand it, he's been dismissed from this morning as it stands, but there's a strong petition to have him come back. Now again, Morgan, like Clarkson, and interestingly enough, they had a run-in themselves in 2004, but you know, they thrive on notoriety. Morgan speaks his mind, he's controversial, he often talks over Susanna Reid, and people respond to it, and you just know that This Morning, or Good Morning, is pitching to the controversy, because they'll have clickbait videos. Morgan is furious with this person. Morgan cannot believe that person. Another thing I dislike about Morgan, although I respect the other side of him, his dogged defence of the tabloid press no matter what, including their paparazzi-esque behaviour. And I do suspect this comes from, you know, a kind of empathy from his time as a tabloid editor. News of the World, then the Daily Mirror. So, what am I driving at with all of this? These three people, I mean, I could name others, Gordon Ramsay, I could name a lot of others, but I'll use those three as examples. They're all pretty famous and they're all pretty notorious. And they've all survived in one way or another because of ratings. Now, I get it, media is business. It's not, you know, a moral platform, a moral campaign group. It's a business. And top executives on those big networks are obviously going to be looking at ratings. I get that. But I do not believe that anybody should be above criticism, point one. And that's what the fanboys need to understand, especially of Clarkson. Because with Kyle, it's actually more women, interestingly enough. Tends to be more female supporters. But anyway, Jeremy Clarkson, another point with him, you know, he assaulted an Irish producer on his show, and a lot of guys at the time would say, oh, it's just two blokes having an argument, as if assault is a normal thing. And the guy ended up taking legal action against Clarkson for that one. You know, since when is assault a normal thing? I have a problem with that sort of thinking, because, you know, that can really, it's also something that we as men need to address, because it's this idea that you should be okay with someone just punching you. You know, it's like, oh well, man up, it's just banter between guys, it's two blokes having an argument. So I have a problem with that mentality. I am not of the Bandit Brigade. I am not one of these people that says, oh well, you know, they've offended someone, so sack them. I certainly don't believe that. But I also don't think that people should be protected solely because they bring in ratings. You know, so they can constantly test the boundaries and constantly be as controversial as they like, and that's fine. And I think that it's this mentality that, well, the rebels. So I think the response to it is to rein in on political correctness, but also challenge this notion that anyone should be protected by the ratings. I mean, I just don't think that's a good mentality in a democracy either. Anyway, this is just my opinion. You don't have to agree. If you're a Clarkson fanboy, well, you're not going to like this, are you? But, why do you care about this video? This is the funny thing. When I criticise people like Jeremy Clarkson, or I got this on Gordon Ramsay, their fans tend to come out with pitchforks, and yet, I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a public figure. So why is my comment so important? I'm not starting any petitions to have anyone banned. So I just don't think anyone should be protected by their own ratings in itself.